All right, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, of course, the narrative argument and show you a couple of examples and some other things to keep in mind. So, let me start just by reviewing kind of what's on the agenda here coming up. So, first, if you look at the syllabus, you'll notice that we're continuing to read examples of narrative arguments, and you guys continue to do an awesome job discussing those in the discussion board. And then, of course, we have a reading quiz this week as well. And then we have on Monday, we have a quiz over academic integrity. And this should be review from like 101 or whatever equivalent it was. But I'm going to show you in a minute where you look to review those. And then also notice that next week, so a week from tomorrow, that's the 10th, we will have the peer review, and that will be online. It'll be asynchronous, and you'll do that through the discussion board. And I will have a separate video that explains how you do that, but it's pretty easy. You work with two other people, and they will read your essay and give you feedback on it. And that draft does not need to be all the way done. It should be about 3/4 of the way done and include a works cited page. And then this draft right here, this is going to be the draft that you submit to me. And then it's not graded, but I'll write feedback on it. And you'll read that feedback, and then you'll submit the final draft of it on the 22nd. So you'll write two drafts before the final draft. And then we move on to rhetorical analysis, and that's a shorter essay, and it's not creative, it's more academic. And then we get into our final project. So, believe it or not, we're kind of moving right along here. Let me start by just kind of showing you some other notes and things that you'll want to make sure that you're looking at this week if you haven't yet already done so. So right now I've got the prompt open, and so a few things just to kind of draw your attention to is just making sure that you understand, like, this is not a research paper. Yes, there is a research component, but that's more just to help you advance your underlying theme of how you're connecting your story to a broader argument. And I'm going to show you here some examples in a minute. 4 to 5 pages. So remember that 4 pages at least means all the way to the bottom of that 4th page. And that does not include the works cited page. You want to keep it formal unless you're using dialogue. And if you use dialogue, just write it right into the paragraph, as opposed to like separating each person speaking into a different paragraph. So just write it right into the paragraph as one. And then two different like organizations here. So this one we call the sandwich model. So where you'll start with a personal story, and then you bring in your outside research and present the wider application, and then you go back in to your personal story. Now, they can be the same personal story, or they can be two related stories. Okay, same thing over here. This is the weave model, where you basically follow this structure, but then you repeat it. Sometimes what I've seen people do is like kind of go backwards. So they might have a flashback right here where they have the ending of the story, and then they kind of work their way on backwards until they get to the beginning. Or maybe they put the climax of the story here, and then they have like what built up to it, and then the conclusion there. So in that way, you're not going to have like your traditional introduction, body, or thesis. Instead, you're going to pick one of these: story, application, or argument, story, or story, application, argument, story, and so on. Okay. Now, where you put the thesis, I talk about this in some of my notes, really depends. Some people begin their paper with it. Some people put it in the very first wider application. Some people don't put it until the end. I would say to try it a few different ways, but make sure for the peer review, make sure that you have it there and that your peer review partners can find it. If they can't find it, then it's a good idea to go back and review how to write a thesis for this paper. And I have some examples of that in the notes section. And then just want to show you a few other things that you'll want to be looking at here. So if you look under class notes, and then so we've already done the grammar and the style, which by the way, you guys did a great job with that. So that's kind of over now. I mean, you can always go back to it and review it, but if you're rusty on MLA format and how like the heading should look and everything, this is where you want to look for that. This will actually help you set up your document that way. And then like quoting, this is a PowerPoint, and if you click on the little speech bubbles, it will explain how you include in-text citations. This again is review from 101. And then this is just a quick works cited guide. You can use something like Easy Bib for this, but just make sure that, you know, first that the sources you're using are credible, that it's not like just some random person that, you know, they've got some authority on the topic, but it doesn't have to be scholarly and it doesn't have to be peer reviewed. And then there's just some other reminders. So I would look at this. I think I did. I went over this in the copy with Katie, but it's good to just refresh your memory. I do tend to see quite a few cliches in this assignment, so just always favoring what's specific. Here's where you're going to find the example thesis statement. This link shows you some examples of what I mean by showing versus telling. So for the narrative argument, you want to really make your reader feel like they are right there with you, so that you're describing like the environment or you're describing the interactions in as much detail as possible. And when we do that, we show the reader versus tell them what happened. So that is like a major feedback thing that I tend to give very often is that you need to, you know, show me what happened as opposed to just telling me. And I'm going to show you some more examples here in a minute. These are just the topics and then some overall works cited tips. This will come into play when we get to the peer review, but this basically just tells you what to be looking for when you respond to someone else's draft. And it's also what I will look at when I respond to your draft. You do not need to fill this out though and turn it in, okay? And then, so the research, you're perfectly welcome to use Google or Google Scholar. Remember, it does not have to be scholarly, it just has to be credible, okay? So these will help you get started, but a simple Google search, or like if you're writing something that's really close to you, maybe you just, as a source, you look at a nonprofit that is dedicated to the type of argument you're making, or maybe you look at an organization in your hometown that is dedicated to whatever type of argument that you're making about something. So let me show you a couple more examples here. Okay, so here's an example from last semester, and I'm just going to kind of read you a little bit of what he did. I am not a morning person. On a typical morning, it takes about 4 alarms just to get me out of bed, a huge coffee to get me out the door, and a miracle to get me through the rest of the day without an afternoon nap. On not so typical mornings, though, I have no issue jumping out of bed in anticipation of what is to come. During the week of my first long journey west, sleep was the last thing on my mind. Escaping the painfully habitual elements of daily life and trading them in for experiences in nature is extremely good for mental health. It's only 4 in the morning, and there is not a sliver of light creeping through the window. I rush out the door right on time, slinging my bag over my shoulder and hopping into the car. My heart races, for I cannot wait for the adventure that began when I got out of bed today. Once I click my seatbelt into place, I feel the car begin to move beneath me. I feel at peace in this moment. Long road trips have always been my favorite kind of vacation. As convenient as traveling by plane may be, there is something special about spending quality time with the people you love while driving across the country, or even just across the state. Denver, Colorado is a 10-hour drive from Brookings. From Denver, a mere 6 more hours by car, and you will reach Moab, Utah. On our drive from Brookings to Denver, I never closed my eyes in fear of missing out. From Denver to Moab, however, I never wanted to close my eyes again. Suddenly, real life had become the dream. Hours feel like minutes when you are experiencing something for the very first time. At 19 years old, these mountains were the first that I had ever seen. I yearned to feel the weight of the world fall off of my shoulders as I drive further and further from the stresses of home, to let the beauty of my surroundings wash my stress away. I am awake, but not really. Nothing could shatter the focus I have put on what lies ahead. The drive from Denver to Moab is nearly all mountains, a shocking change from the flat fields that I'm used to seeing. With nearly everyone else in the car asleep, I'm able to escape into my thoughts. The rest of the world melts around me, and I can physically feel a sense of calm rush over me. This feeling only amplifies when I open my window and feel the cool, crisp mountain air in my face for the first time. I have always wanted to see that part of the country, but I have no idea how good it would feel to be present in a moment like that, in a place like that. I have never felt more at home than I did in the mountain pass, more at peace. Beautiful journeys are said to lead to beautiful destinations, and this is one. After the shortest 16 hours of my life, we arrived at Dead Horse Point State Park in Moab, Utah. Upon our arrival, the sun was just beginning to set over the fiery red rocks. As I approached the cliff face, bitter winds made themselves known, but the stream that ran through the valley below flowed calmly. Birds flew in golden light overhead, and the bright red rocks slowly turned to a calm shade of orange. Before the light faded, I hiked to the higher ground to make the most of what was left of the sunset. At the top of the lookout, I stumbled upon a man standing with one arm stretched while the other gripped a hiking stick. Yelling over the rush of the violet winds, the man called out, "It's a magical moment." I never caught his name, but I will never forget this man. I decided then and there that life is nothing more than a series of moments. These moments, whether big or small, can be wasted or embraced. I yearn for more magical moments like this one. I ache for strong winds, red rocks, and gold light. Nothing is more healing than raw, natural moments such as this. Unfortunately, the longest 16 hours of my life were ahead of me, as a deadly virus was brought to the U.S. during our time in Utah. In a mere 7 days, I was fortunate enough to experience 5 national parks as well as 3 state parks. A week full of hiking, adventures, and time spent with people was the way that I ended what I see now as a pre COVID 19 era. The drive home was now filled with less wonder and more human fear. With each hour came more information, with each stop, more fear of infection. COVID took the world by storm, a storm that I never expected to rattle me for so long. The road home was simply gloomy. It felt as if nothing was safe as we left it. According to an article published by Healthline, the presence of depression symptoms in American adults have increased 3 times amidst the COVID 19 pandemic. This statistic, as scary it may be, is a new reality for many Americans. Although scary, there are ways to combat depression. Because in person social interaction is not a safe option right now, getting in touch with nature is an especially important tool to use. According to a recent publication from Harvard School of Medicine, simply getting outside from time to time can reduce symptoms of depression as well as stress and anxiety. Depression is a serious, crippling sickness that affects the lives of a large amount of people. Taking time to get outside when you can and living for moments such as sunsets or car rides in scenic areas is more important than ever before. The minute that I got home, I knew that nothing would be the same. In the weeks that followed, I moved out of school, quarantined with my family, and navigated online courses to the best of my ability. After spending a week feeling more free than I ever have, the 4 walls of my room simply did not cut it anymore. I could not stand to be so alone. Weeks went by and nothing seemed to change except for my mental health. But the more time that I spent in my room, the less time that I wanted to spend out of my bed. Getting up in the morning became hard. There was no longer an adventure to look forward to or loved ones to spend time with. A crippling depression slowly took over my entire mind and body, and I was no longer myself. I wish that I could say that this did not last long, but it did. I swore to myself that I wanted to do better, be better, but I could not figure out how. I spent weeks alone in bed, with nothing but my sadness to dwell on. With the help of family and friends, I began to do more for myself on a daily basis, getting out of bed, going on walks, and opening the window so that the sun shined in did wonders for my mental health. Eventually, feeling that I still needed more, I started to take drives around sunset. I love driving out to a gravel road with no idea where it will take me. As the rocks are disturbed beneath my tires, a cloud of dust forms behind me, and the only direction to look is forward. One day, while doing nothing but looking forward, my drive brought me to a small lake with a picturesque dock. I pulled over, almost out of instinct, feeling the same desire to be outside as I did before when I had come home from my trip. The wind on that particular day was bitter, and I felt a sense of familiar calm as I left the car. The sun, just starting to set, turns everything around me to a golden shade of orange. Sitting on the dock that night, I could not help but think to myself, it's a magical moment. Experiences are what make us who we are. Life is short, and circumstances can change in the course of a week or even much quicker. COVID took a lot away, but a virus cannot take the simple joy of being outside away. Escaping the painfully habitual elements of daily life and trading them in for experiences in nature is extremely good for mental health. Okay, so he did a really nice job with this essay. I could feel that, especially when he talked about how the depression kind of overtook him once he had to move back home with his parents. I could really feel the emotion in his writing. And I also was really, I thought that the descriptions of like the birds and the color of the rocks and this man that he met, I thought all of that was really engaging. So I mean, he did a really nice job with this. And you know, it's a, dare I say, simple type of argument, but it's basically, you know, if we look at his thesis here, right here, escaping the painfully habitual elements of daily life and trading them in for experiences in nature is extremely good for mental health, right? And he didn't need like 20 sources to make that argument. And if you look at the assignment prompt, it tells you how many sources you can have. But he just looked at two different sources to make that claim or to make that argument. And he bookended it with kind of breaking out from this depression that he was in by taking drives at home and finding that same sense of peace and serenity in, you know, his own hometown, which I enjoyed. I would say in terms of improvement, I mean, there were a couple typos in here that I skipped over, and then there were quite a few cliches in here. So let me just show you a few so that you kind of know what I mean. Some of them are less obvious, but things like jumping out of bed, the last thing on my mind. Sliver of light is a little bit cliche. And let's see, there are quite a few. He didn't use a ton of dialogue in here, which is fine. I mean, you don't have to, but you want to try to make the dialogue meaningful, right? As opposed to just kind of like, hey, where are you going tonight, right? You want it to be, have, you know, like a vivid impression on your reader. And it's certainly okay to do like he did here, where he italicized certain words for emphasis. You can do that, just don't do it too much or it tends to fall a little bit flat. Wonders. Here's another one. Okay, let's look at another one here. This one is pre-COVID. It's really interesting how this assignment has evolved now that COVID is in all of our lives. So I'll start this one. No, oh, and I should say this was for an honors class, so it's a bit longer. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And they had different requirements for like sources than we have. No, that's not right. That's stupid. I can't write that. The click of fingers dashing over black keys does not resonate in the room. Instead, as an anxious tick, I wring my hands together, rubbing my thumb into my palm until the skin is red while I struggle to spin concrete words and sentences from intangible thoughts. My thoughts are knotted and tangled together like they've been attacked and played with by a mischievous creature. I have to labor over the strands to pull them apart so that slowly I can write my paper. See spot run, see spot run. I do not like green eggs and ham. Part of me hates myself for struggling so much with writing a simple essay. However, as much as I try, I cannot do anything about it. My dual credit comp teacher was just as likely to give a pop quiz as she was to chastise the class about grammar. And as the toughest teacher in high school, rumors flew that she graded harder than college professors. This weighs on my mind as I try to piece together my paper on GMOs. My thoughts whirl like ice cream dispensing from a machine. You're not good enough. Why am I like this? You're not good enough. Why am I like this? I chase my thoughts around and around. I want to pin them down and force them into submission, but I can't. I can't grab something made of mist. It slips through the cracks and fills my head with irrational thoughts and collects in my chest. The anxiety blooms there with a stinging pressure, while it squeezes my heart with sharp talons. Still, that feeling, the monster of smoke and claws, drives me to sit here for hours and work on my paper. It makes me reread my essay 5 times and still causes me to be nervous when I turn the white pages into the wire basket on my teacher's desk. As I turn to walk out the door, the paper has a voice now. It whispers to my thoughts, making me question myself again. My fear of failure does not let up. The anxiety and fear of underperforming are like an old friend to me. The fear has followed me around as a shadow for a long time, but it has not restrained its grip to me. Like a rumor that gets spread in a small town, it's weaseled its way to others too. Because fear of failure is so prevalent, especially among students, researchers like Krista de Castella and others are studying the impact of the fear of failure on people. They examine the previously constructed quadrupolar models, which outline the 4 different ways success and fear express themselves. Optimists are success oriented with a low fear of failure. Overstrivers have a high success orientation, but the fear of underperforming is their underlying drive. On the other hand, self-protectors have high fear and low success orientation. Finally, the model defines failure acceptors as those who are low in both fear of failure and success orientation. I chose to focus on self-protectors and overstrivers because they both have a high fear of failure and exhibit some of the same behaviors I see in myself. Okay, so now you get a sense of kind of how she approached this paper, and she took kind of a common issue, right? The fear of failure, or sort of that idea that you have to be a perfectionist in all your grades. And she put me right into the action with actually like writing her paper. She used a bit of italics as sort of an aside, or what she was maybe thinking to herself. I liked how she used short paragraphs to kind of keep my attention. And then as she gets in here, you can see how she puts in her argument really smoothly in terms of the fear of failure as sort of her topic, right? And I like how she introduced that first source. Unlike the paper that I just read that kind of just scratches the surface on mental health and depression, this student, and like I said, this was an honors class and it was a 6-page paper instead of a 4 to 5-page paper. So, but what she did was she really focused on this idea of self-protectors versus overstrivers, and that those 2 key terms were something that really interested her. And so she pretty much just talked about those 2 elements throughout her paper. And then she kind of used this, like right here, she used this paper as a way to help her heal, or a way to help her identify with why she does what she does. So that's really kind of how she used this. So yes, she was making an argument, and I'm just kind of skimming this so you can take a look at kind of what else she's doing. But she's making an argument, but she's also using this paper to like help her personally. So that's another option too, right? You can use it kind of like the iSearch paper, is you can use it, practically speaking, to maybe learn more about yourself or why you do certain things. One thing that I really liked about her essay is that she uses a lot of strong verbs. If we go back to the beginning, I think this one feels more like showing instead of telling than the last one did. So she uses things like click, click. She uses key verbs like knotted, tangled, labor, flew, force, blooms, So you can kind of see what I mean by that, as opposed to, this goes back to the verbal style, but as opposed to always relying on like have, has, was, is, were, etc. And so I think that helps. She had a couple cliches in here too, but they weren't as prevalent as the last paper that I saw, or that we read together, rather. Like pin them down is a cliche. So be mindful of cliches. They tend to pop up. It's always better to say something in your own words than it is to use a cliche. Okay. Let's see. And then I think that's it in terms of what I wanted the examples to show. Both very strong papers. Both have their own strengths, their own maybe places where they could have improved. And both kind of different takes on it. One, I think, with the COVID was, this is a new trend, obviously a new issue that we're all dealing with, and here's one important way, and this is my journey through it. And then there's this paper that really helped her, practically speaking, understand why she was the way that she was. And so her argument was, it's not that perfectionists are snooty or that they're high strung, but rather, X, Y, and Z. There's these other things going on. So anyway, okay, I will check in with y'all later, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.